today to introduce today's presenter, Gidget Pryor. Gidget has worked as a network administrator, programmer, developer, database administrator, analyst, business intelligence consultant, project manager, and a solutions engineer. Is that all, Gidget? Gracious. So you guys can all read, so I'm not going to continue reading this thing for you. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say to Gidget, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. All right, so today's agenda, we're going to be looking at why you should even be interested in finishing. What's the point in finishing a certification that is going to retire? We'll look at some quick tips to help you finish. We'll look at discovering some next steps, like what's the path for you to take. We'll also look at the new role-based certifications that have been out a couple of years now. I guess the role-based certifications have officially been out a little over a year. The Azure certifications have been out a couple of years. We'll also look at how to map your current certifications to the new ones. So if you are pursuing the MCSA, MCSE, or MCSD, and you're finishing up, what would be your next step for another certification as you move forward? Because Microsoft is retiring the certifications that we are so familiar with. We'll also look at some steps that you can take, kind of a step-by-step process as you think about certification. And we'll look at why role-based certification matters if you're just on-premise. Role-based certifications, you may know, are they are certifications that primarily relate to the cloud. There are some other things that are considered in those role-based certifications, but it's really technology as it exists in Microsoft's cloud. So why should you finish? Well, there's a lot of good reasons to finish. The credentials are very valuable. If you do research on the credentials, these are still some of the highest paid IT certifications. This is your last opportunity to earn this type of certification. Yes, it will eventually expire. Microsoft is expiring their certifications, although I have an MCSE that Microsoft created and said that particular MCSE would never expire. And then they started the expiration process. So I will continue to have an MCSE into the future, but the ones that you would be pursuing now, those do have an expiration date. But it does give you a credential that you have established, and it helps you as you move forward. Some companies will continue to look for those certifications. When you study for an exam, there are always things that you will come across that you might not be using in your job day to day. So studying, just the process of studying, whether you do or don't take the exam, just the process of studying for the exam, and if you go take the exam, will cause you to learn things that you might not learn otherwise. I've come across valuable features in a product that I wouldn't have known existed otherwise, but through the certification process, I discovered something that might be useful to me in a current or upcoming project. So the process of certification is helpful. And as I mentioned, these are some of the highest paid certifications. So if you want to finish, when we advertised this webinar, when we put it on the books for this period of time, the certifications were supposed to expire June 30th of this year. With the coronavirus, Microsoft has extended that and given you an additional 7 months. So you have until January 31st of next year to get your certification, which might sound like you have a lot more time to finish up. It's great news that you do have additional time. Most people, it takes them a month or two of pretty diligent study to get ready for an exam. So if you were starting now and you wanted to pursue an MCSE, let's say an MCSE in SQL Server, we're going to show you an example, you would need 5 exams for that. So as you study, you would factor in maybe a month, month and a half, 2 months per exam. So for the MCSA, you'd need 3 exams, MCSE, you'd need 5. So some tips to be able to finish. We do, of course, we're a training company. We do have classes that map to these certifications. So we have individual classes. We also have boot camps that can help you as you pursue certification, or we can give you the classes that help you step by step. If we don't have a boot camp and there's a group of you at your company that are pursuing certification, we can certainly make a certification path, a boot camp path for you. I have a customer that this week, they are running a Windows 10 boot camp. We don't have an official offering of a Windows 10 boot camp at this time. However, we are offering it for this customer. We've partnered together the courses that map to that certification, and we're giving them exam prep, and we're spending some time talking about the exam. So that is something that we can do. It is also important that you know, regardless of a class or a boot camp, you are going to have some time where you self-study. Microsoft does not require you to take classes to be able to take a certification. You can just go in and you don't even have to study. You can go in and take the certification if you feel like you're ready for it, and you can perhaps pass the exam. Most people need more than that. So I was an instructor for 27 years as I was doing some other things, you know, database consulting, administration, and I'm still an MCT, just taught class last week. But my current role is as a solutions engineer. And one of my favorite things about being a solutions engineer is that I don't have to take and pass exams all the time. So I've taken and passed somewhere around 100 exams. Not all of them are Microsoft, but most of them are. And it just is, it's a rigorous process. It takes some effort to be able to do it. There's also exam prep software. There's a couple of different types of exam prep software. There's what Microsoft considers legitimate, and then there is cheat software. We do not recommend that you use anything that is considered cheat software because Microsoft can take your credentials from you. If you're earning the certification, I hope that it is your desire to do it legitimately so that you can feel good about your accomplishment. So there are a couple of very good software. We're not, you know, endorsing them, but ones that Microsoft, not Microsoft, ones that Global Knowledge has used over the years is Kaplan IT. It used to be called Transcender. There was another company that was called Self-Test Software that merged with them. Now they are called Kaplan IT Software. Very good test software. Another one that is excellent is the Measure Up software. So that is a software that I believe was actually started at Microsoft, or maybe Microsoft bought it at some point, but in any case, it is a legitimate test software as well. So both of them are very good. You don't need to purchase both of them. They're close enough to each other that one will be sufficient. Measure Up a lot of times has a better price, but you should check them both because sometimes they'll say if you purchase, you know, 2 exam pieces of software together, they will give you a discount. You might get a 30% discount or something. Microsoft does publish the exam objectives on their website. So if you go to www.microsoft.com/learning and you look at the objectives for an exam, you can look up a specific exam number. It has objectives and it gives you a percentage. It says, you know, 25% will be on installing and configuring. 20% will be on some other area. So they give you percentages. The way that I personally study is I will open up those objectives and I look at everything that's in the objectives, everything that they list. Sometimes it's just a bulleted list, sometimes it's paragraphs of information. Look at everything there and you better be familiar with what they say. If you take a class, Microsoft always puts things on the exam that are not part of the curriculum that they recommend that you take the class to get ready for the exam. So for example, course code 20461 maps to exam 70461. But they expect you to learn things like how to create a table, Well, that course does not have in it how to create a table. So you will always be required to study some additional things on your own. So make sure that you do that. Make sure you check out those exam objectives. And then there are the exams. We do have a webinar that was presented back in January on how to study for the exam. It's an hour-long, step-by-step, you know, what to expect on the exam, the types of questions you're going to get. I'll talk a little bit about that, but if you want something more extensive, we did go through and really think that out, analyzing, you know, all the different scenarios that Microsoft presents, the different ways that they have questions, and how you should study. So hopefully that will be a useful resource for you as well. All right, discovering your next steps. You need to decide on your goal. Would I provide the websites at the end of the webinar? Yes, I will. So decide on your goal. Do you want to start out and just take and pass one exam? If you take and pass one professional exam, those are the exams that cost $165, which is most of them, you will become a Microsoft certified professional in whatever that is. So if I took a SQL Server administration or a Windows Server administration course and exam, I would become a Microsoft certified professional in that area. The MCSA oftentimes is made up of 3 exams. So you will perhaps set your sights on becoming an MCSA with those 3 exams. That's not always the case. It depends on the particular MCSA, but they are typically 3. The MCSE is usually 1 or 2 additional exams on top of that. There are some tracks where you can become an MCSE in 2 areas of the product. For example, SQL Server. I hold the MCSE for both the data platform and for the business intelligence tracks. That required 7 exams. The MCSA is exactly the same. And then there's 2 exams to get the data platform MCSE, and there's 2 different exams to get the business intelligence exams, the MCSE for business intelligence. All right, and then think about what your plan is going to be. I would advise you, you don't have to be legalistic about it, but I would advise you to just look at your calendar and see what's realistic. You know, can you afford to have 2 hours, 3 evenings a week? Or is it better for you to block off 2 full weekends to get ready for that exam? So what is your specific plan going to be? And then follow that plan. So taking the action. Are you going to take a course? Are you going to get test prep software? Looking at the objectives. So thinking through what your step-by-step process is going to be. All right, so I thought we'd look at a couple of examples of the certification. So the first one I listed is the MCSA and then the MCSE for business intelligence. The MCSA is made up of 3 exams. As I said, you are not required to take a course to be able to take the exam. It is extremely helpful. One of the difficult things about being an instructor is most of the time we have to take exams before the courseware is even out. So I got a question this morning. There's a new AZ 104 course that is coming out. We're going to start that course in May. And Microsoft did just release the courseware, but release the courseware and the exam, but a lot of instructors took the exam before the courseware was released. So they're trying to get ready in advance for that. And a lot of instructors will take the beta exam, which is way before the courseware comes out. You can take the beta exams also. The only difference in the beta exams these days and the regular exam is that you don't get your score right away when you take a beta exam. It used to be the case when you took a beta exam, you had to take the entire test bank of questions or most of the questions. So if a regular exam was going to take 2 hours, the beta exam might take 4.5 or 5. I stopped taking beta exams as soon as I did one of those. Querying SQL Server 20461 is the course. 70-461 is the exam. So they just replaced the 20 with 70 for the exam numbers. That's the pattern. You do not have to take exams in any particular order. So you could start out with an MCSE exam. You could start out with this Designing Business Intelligence Solutions. You could do that first. If you feel ready for that one first, you could do that one first. Studying for your exams, a lot of times studying for multiple things is helpful. And what I mean by that is if I'm studying reporting services and data models from a practical standpoint, I'm actually implementing those. So it's hands-on. And I'm studying designing business intelligence at the same time, those overlap. There's a lot of overlap in those exams. I took these exams on the same day. I studied for them together and I took them on the same day. The Querying SQL Server exam, if this is a path that you're interested in, I will tell you that that is one of the most difficult exams that I have ever taken, which was surprising to me because I had programmed in SQL Server for 20 years using T-SQL, but they just did some tricky things on the exam, making it kind of difficult, where they would, nest 7 functions and 1 parentheses would be different, things like that. So they are very detailed. They are doable, however. So I want you to feel encouraged that it is possible to get the certifications. There's some overlap between the querying and the SQL Server administration. There's not much overlap between the implementing a data warehouse and these other two in the MCSA. This exam is really about SSIS. All right, another example is a Windows server. So if you want to take installation, storage, and compute with Windows Server 2016, the course number is 20740, and the exam number replaces the 20 with 70. And then you can take one of these exams. I didn't list out what all of these are, but you can go look them up on the Microsoft website. All right, role-based certifications. These are the newer certification paths. This is what Microsoft is really promoting more at this time. They created the role-based certifications to hopefully match what someone's job role is. To be honest with you, I think that the way the MCSA, MCSE, and MCSD work, MCSD is the developer, so if you're a programmer, the way that all of those work really map to job roles as well. But they have now branded it as role-based certification. So what are you doing in the cloud and using that as your particular role? So we'll look at one of these. These certifications are intended to apply to a specific Azure-based roles, but not all the titles include Azure. For example, you might be getting a certification in Office 365, or you might be getting the Modern Desktop certification. That's a Windows 10 certification. So they do have an equivalent. If you were a developer in .NET and you got the MCSD for .NET, as you move into the cloud, you would be looking at things that say developer. Perhaps you would also be looking at DevOps. DevOps is really the person that manages the code in the cloud, which may or may not be the developer. That might be the administrator that's rolling out those changes. So there are equivalents as you move forward. It is useful to get your MCSA, E, or D, and then move to the equivalent Azure-based certification. It shows that you have skills and knowledge in an on-premise environment, meaning you have your own data center that you're working with, or software that is installed locally for you. as well as data in the cloud. So moving to a cloud-based certification. So Azure, Modern Desktop, Developer, Office 365, SQL in the cloud. I can't remember if these days it's called Azure SQL or SQL Azure. Microsoft rebranded it at one point, and I never can remember which way it is. But if you see Azure SQL or SQL Azure, that is SQL Server in the cloud. There are various certification levels. Just like we had the certification levels of MCP, then MCSA, then MCSE, Microsoft has done something similar. Fewer exams in general. So if you take the Azure Fundamentals course, which is AZ 900, or if you took the course M10979, it's now been retired. It was a 2-day fundamentals course. There was no exam associated with that, but if you took that course, you should be able to go into this AZ 900 certification exam. Microsoft, thankfully, has now made the exam number and the course number identical. So if you take and pass that one exam, you're not considered an MCP, you're considered Azure Fundamentals Certified. If you take the Azure Administrator AZ-103 course and exam, the Azure Administrator is achieved. And I put these side by side rather than, kind of moving down the screen like we did before, because if you want to become an Azure Administrator, you are only required to take the AZ-103. So you need to look at each specific certification path and see if there is a prerequisite. With the MCSE, you cannot become an MCSE unless you're an MCSA. And you can't become an MCSA unless you took and passed one exam, which made you an MCP. They don't emphasize the MCP, but that is the case. All right, and then the architect requires 2 exams. So the more expert level generally requires more exams or a more difficult exam. So how do you map? You figure out what you were doing on premise and how that moves into the cloud. So I gave some examples here. If you were a Windows 10 desktop support professional, you would move into Modern Desktop. So the exam numbers, it doesn't say Azure, but Modern Desktop is MD100, MD101. Those are the course numbers and those are the exam numbers. Windows Server, you would most likely become an Azure Administrator, an Azure Architect. You might even be the person that is an Azure DevOps professional managing code in the cloud, managing the changes to code in the cloud. SharePoint and Exchange, you're going to be looking more at the Office 365. Tools that you use to manage on-premise for Exchange, for example. What you're currently doing on-premise, as you move into the cloud, the tools are not wildly different. Working on a SQL Server database in Azure is not wildly different than it is on-premise. So the skills that you are working on right now on-premise, the certification that you're working on for an MCSA or MCSE or MCSD, those skills will help you as you move forward to a cloud-based certification or to a cloud-based environment. .NET would be the Azure developer. This is, at this point, one exam. So it's the AZ-203 or the new AZ-204. All of these new certifications, the role-based certifications, they are expiring certifications as well. So Microsoft expects people now to continue to get certified. All right, so we've talked some about steps. What is required for you to do is to take and pass an exam. What is recommended is for you to take classes, because there are things that will be covered in the class that would be covered in your class discussions, in your hands-on labs, that pertain exactly to the exam. Some of the exams, role-based exams in particular, have simulations in them. And they're not really even simulations. They take you out to the actual cloud. They take you to Azure, and you are expected to perform certain tasks. They may ask you to set up a virtual machine with SQL Server on it, or they may ask you to configure a network in Azure. They may ask you to provision storage, and you're required to do those things. With the coronavirus, Microsoft removed those labs, the actual hands-on portion. They removed that for a couple of weeks. They have reintroduced the Azure Pass as of this morning, and so I would imagine they will reintroduce those hands-on. So be expecting that. And then if you don't get it and you just get multiple choice, drag and drop, put steps in order types of questions, then you're all set. But you need to anticipate that you might have simulations. Yeah, so good question in the chat. It says, and I do see that there's some questions in the Q&A, which I will get to as well. It says, I'm an old MCSE in version 2003. Is there an upgrade path, or do I have to start from the new path? You would have to start new. Microsoft in the past has had some upgrades, but it's usually from one version to the other. So like from MCSE 2003 to 2008, but those have retired. Great question though. So do review the exam objectives, do study on your own, plan for some study time. The exams are difficult. You're very unlikely to be able to go in and take and pass an exam without studying. I will tell you a true but kind of funny story. I was an MCDST. It's a certification that doesn't exist any longer, but it was a desktop support person. And so I had achieved that credential, and the next step was when it became Windows Vista. Now, I personally never used Windows Vista. I didn't really know anything about Windows Vista, but I had a free exam voucher, and it was going to expire, and I didn't have anything in particular I wanted to take, so I thought, you know, and it had a free retake with it also. I thought, you know, I'm just going to go see what's on the exam. So I talked to a friend of mine who was a desktop support professional, and their company was using Windows Vista. So I talked to him for about 30 minutes. I got exam prep software and went through it, you know, maybe for an hour, something like that. And then I went and took the exam because I happened to be in the DC area at the time, and our Global Knowledge Training Center was a testing center at that time. And so I just decided I would go take it. I was there, it was convenient. I didn't have a lot of time to study. I was up there teaching, but I went in. I think I made a 971. It was some ridiculously high score. I had no idea what I was doing. I just went in and I said, yeah, that sounds like what they would call it. And I just guessed all the way through the exam, thinking that I would fail the exam, but I could go and retake it. I just wanted to see what was on it. So just because you pass an exam doesn't necessarily mean you know about the technology. That was a fluke. You're not likely to go in and just guess and get a good score like that. I have no idea still how that happened. I have had other things. This is many, many years ago. I had a TCP/IP exam, and I was doing a lot of TCP/IP at the time. I was a network administrator. I was doing a lot of work with TCP/IP. You know, I knew how to do subnetting and supernetting and a lot of things that I've probably forgotten how to do now. And I took that exam and I failed it. And I was really surprised. And I don't know if I was overthinking the questions, because that's really possible to do, or if I just don't know what happened. but I had to take the exam over again, and it was a technology that I was really working with. So if you know a lot about a technology and you go in and you take the exam and you fail it, it doesn't mean that you don't know the technology. It means it was that particular set of questions that you got, or maybe you were overthinking it. If you know a lot about a technology, it's very easy to sit in the exam and kind of argue with the question to say, well, that's not how you would do it in the real world. But you only have the answers that they've given you. So you have to choose the best answer based on what they have provided for you. So studying on your own, highly recommend getting the exam prep software. The way that I use the exam prep software is I'll start the exam and I'll immediately end it. And that means that I will have failed this practice test, but you can take it as many times as you want. What that does for both the software vendors that I've mentioned is it allows you to go and review the explanations about the questions. So it allows you to see why they picked the answer they did. You're not so interested in what the question and the answer is on the practice exam. That's not what you're going to get when you go to the actual exam. So you don't want to just memorize those. It won't help you. But what will help you is the explanation about why they picked that. And usually there are links to white papers or websites that will help you study for that area. So if it's a question you're not familiar with, it's an area of the product that you don't know much about, you have some additional resources there. So that's how I study. I get the exam objectives, I get the exam prep software, I end the exam, study from that, and then I'll go take the practice exam and see how I'm doing. If you take the practice test and you're not exactly sure, thank you. If you're not exactly sure of a question, but you guess, you know, you're like, it's between B and D. So you guess, and you get it right. Then when you go to review your wrong answers, you got that question right, but you got it right hedging your bets. Whereas if you study, you would have a more firm foundation in that area, helping to clarify why one or the other was correct. All right, so you might be thinking to yourself, look, we're on premise, we're never going to go to the cloud. We hear this from customers. You know, we have plenty of customers that have gone to the cloud, but we have a lot of people that are still on premise, and they just don't trust the cloud, or they're in an industry that there are regulations and there's something that's preventing them from being able to go to the cloud. So why would you want to get a certification in that? First of all, it is a newer certification, and you may not always be at the company where you're currently working. So having some cloud-based skills will help you. You are going to be interacting with other companies that are cloud-based. I was doing some work yesterday. You know, it was some personal things that I was doing, and I was dealing with a company who has their data in the cloud, and they were having trouble. We were having trouble uploading some things in there. And so it was really their company. I was trying to submit some documentation to be able to get a refund on something. But I needed to be able to talk to them about what was happening. I needed to be able to have enough knowledge, or it was helpful to have enough knowledge to tell them why it was happening and what I thought we could do to try and fix it. The person on the receiving end was just trying to get the receipts from me. They didn't know anything really about technology. So it was a useful conversation. So it enhances your skills. You're going to be interacting with other people. Cloud-based certifications do matter. And on-premise certifications do matter. I encourage you to get both. All right, so in wrapping up, I just want to talk a little bit more about things to think about as you go get certified. Okay, and again, we have an hour-long presentation on it, so I'm not going to go through all of it, but you, on the exam, the format of the questions is drag and drop, multiple choice, put things in order. They may ask you to patch 2 servers and that are in a cluster, and they want to know what you should do first, what you should do second, and so on. So you will have those types of questions. You might have some questions that are fill in the blank. The T-SQL exam, when I took it, did not have that. But I've coached a lot of students through that exam, and they have had fill in the blank types of questions. It asks you to code something and you code it. Those are pretty difficult to grade, because to solve any programming problem, you can come up with 10 different ways to do it probably. So how do they consider all the possibilities as they're grading that? So you won't see a lot of those, but you may get them. And then you may have simulations. When I tell you that you're going to have multiple choice, most people think A, B, C, and D. On my business intelligence exams, I had choose all that apply, A through M. So it's not just A, B, C, and D. It's not like, oh, I've got a 25% chance. They'll have choose all that apply, choose 2, choose 3, choose the best answer. There may be multiple things that work. And again, you need to put your Microsoft hat on and say, what would Microsoft say is the best option here? It may not be what you personally think is the best option, but you're trying to think like the person who wrote the exam questions. All right, so let me look at the Q&A here. I know we have a few questions. Did Microsoft retire the certification planner tool that was available for MCP? I do not know about that tool. What was it? Maybe I know it by a new name.
Jen, if you want to put the name of the tool in the chat or in the Q&A, we can come back to it.
Okay, yeah, that would be good. Can you use role-based certs for on-premise work? Yes, it's not a direct mapping, but if you have a role-based certification, there are some tools that look similar. So let's say that you get a role-based cert in Office 365. The administration tool that you're working with there is very similar to what the on-premise tool looks like. So if I understand correctly, the MCSA for Windows Server should be quite similar to the role-based Azure Administrator. Or is there a lot of more emphasis on how to manage Azure configurations and less about Windows roles and features? It's pretty close. You will see a lot of overlap between the MCSA for Windows Server and the role-based Azure Administrator. Will there be a SQL query exam? There is a SQL query exam. I'm assuming you mean, is there a SQL query exam for the cloud? You may have some questions that are, what could you do in Azure on your querying? The querying language, T-SQL, is really the same in Azure that it is on-premise. So for example, the latest 2016 query exam, you might see some Azure questions on there, but it isn't a whole separate exam because it really isn't a whole separate technology. Does that make sense? The language is the same regardless of which one. The differences are that there are some statements like merge or use that you cannot use in the cloud. So they might want to know what are the exceptions or how does it work a little different in the cloud. Okay, can you take the exams online, or do you have to find a facility? Did I mention that one? My questions just went in a different order all of a sudden. You can take the exams online. In fact, with the coronavirus, the only way you can take the exams right now is online. So you can take them from your home. You will need, when you take it from your home, there are a lot of pretty strict rules. I haven't done one from home. It's just weird to me that, you know, I will never have met the person that's moderating my exam and just watching me the whole time. That's just odd to me. So I've always gone to a testing center. I guess, you know, if I decide to take a certification exam while this is going on, I will be taking it from home. It is helpful to have a separate device webcam because they expect you to show your work area. You have to show behind and underneath your desk and around your desk. They need to be able to see that, and that's kind of hard to do with a built-in webcam. Also, if there's any movement or if they hear any noise, or if, you know, if you're moving around too much, they will scold you a little bit. I've been told. Like I said, I haven't done it yet. What would you recommend for an MCSE upgrade that works as a single IT department in manufacturing environment? What type of work are you doing? Are you doing Windows work?
And that question was from Greg Underwood. Greg, if you want to put something in the chat or in the Q&A, that way we can answer your question a little bit better.
Yeah. So if you tell me what your job role is, I can make a recommendation for you. I had heard from someone at Microsoft there shouldn't be any questions that don't specify the number of answers. So select all that applies shouldn't show, but select answers 2, 2, 3, or 5. I've had many choose all that apply. Tons of them. Okay, Greg, I see that. I'm the only one in IT, so general duties. I would start with if you want an Azure certification, I would start with the modern desktop. So the MD100 and MD101, because that's going to be most of your day-to-day activities, I would imagine. And then from there, if you wanted a server certification, so you could pursue either Windows Server or Azure Administrator if you're looking more toward role-based or cloud. What are the new SQL Server on-premise exams and certifications? The new SQL Server on-premise exams and certifications are the 2016 exams. There's not one that is really just Azure-based. So there's a course code. I can't think of the Microsoft course code, but for global knowledge, if you want to look it up on our website, it's course 4397. 50% of that class is on-premise and 50% is cloud SQL. So that exam would cover both. But anything that's 2016 is the latest. The query exam is now separate, but will it be in the future? Microsoft doesn't tell us. They really don't tell us what they're doing. Let's see. Do we have to practice PowerShell thoroughly? And what do you recommend for best to prepare for the Azure Administrator Architect? For the Azure Administrator or Architect, I would recommend taking the classes, getting the exam objectives, getting the exam prep software because it exists now. It didn't exist for a little while, but I would get that. All right, what's the major difference between taking the MCSA bootcamp versus taking the courses individually? The courses individually focus around skills and hands-on. You have more time to do the labs kind of step by step and really talk through them. Whereas the MCSA bootcamp, or when we had MCSE bootcamps, it's a very fast pace. So rather than taking, for example, 3 SQL courses that are 5 days apiece, you're taking all 3 5-day classes in a 9-day format. So it's very intense. All right. What about PowerShell depth level covered on Azure exam? Microsoft reserves the right to ask you anything they want to, but considering all of the other topics that they're going to cover, I wouldn't expect you to get anything really deep. But again, I would pay attention to what they are currently saying in the exam objectives, and I would look at the exam prep software, because the exam prep software typically represents what you are going to see just in terms of content, what you'll see when you get to the exam. All right, any other questions? I think I got everything.
I think that's it, Gidget. Appreciate it so much. I saw a comment from Eric Herman down there. The best testing device I've ever heard. Thank you.
Yeah,
So
I saw that too. Thank
that's
you
awesome.
for that. Okay, well, I can stick around for a few more minutes if anybody has any additional questions. Thank you all so much for coming. I have a few things here. And I will put, let me just put it in the chat really fast for everyone. If you do have additional questions, this is my email address, and I am happy to answer all of you. So just let me know if I can help you figure out your path and your next steps. Would be glad to help you in any way. So to help you with this, Global Knowledge currently has a lot of our courses, most of the ones that would pertain to the exams, at a 40% discount right now to help you finish. So these are guaranteed to run courses that are in a virtual format. So be sure you check that out. We'd love to have you in class. We already did our questions. If you do have questions, you can email me directly, or you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or of course, globalknowledge.com. And I will put the website in here. Also, the webinar that I mentioned, should be on the Global Knowledge website under resources and webinars. The one that I mentioned about certification kind of process, step by step. All right, thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Gidget. We appreciate your time. Everyone be sure to continue to visit the Global Knowledge website to access additional free resources like technical articles, white papers, and webinars. Again, this presentation will be made available to everyone, emailed to the email you gave us when you registered. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.